Well, now, in May this year, as you're probably aware, voters will go to the polls all over the European Union for the European elections. You may not have heard about it all, but you may not care about it as well. But our politicians are worried about it, with one exception, of course, Nigel Farage. So could 2014 be his and UKIP's year? I'm joined now by three expert political pundits. They are the assistant editor with The Spectator, Isabel Hardman, the deputy political editor at the FT, Elizabeth Rigby, and Gordon Brown's former pollster and the founder of Britain Thinks, Deborah. Mattinson, a very good morning to you all. Let's go down the line. Isabel, I said then Nigel Farage's year and UKIP's, but really in the public mind, and you know, I had an interview with him earlier on this morning, UKIP is Nigel Farage, isn't it?
It is, and that's a real challenge for him, particularly if he wants to reach out to Labour voters. He's not really a natural Labour voter figure. He's got a deputy leader, Paul Nuttall, who's much more Labour. He's a Liverpudlian. He doesn't talk like Nigel Farage. He's got the same instincts as Nigel Farage, but he's able to present UKIP in a slightly different way. And if Farage is wise, he should make UKIP less about him and more about those around him who present a slightly different image.
But I mean, do you go along with that? I mean, can he do it, and does he need to? Because, you know, they have a raft of policies. If you look at them, they don't really join up. But people don't really care about that. UKIP is the none of the above party and the party of immigration.
Exactly. I mean, at the moment, UKIP is still a protest party. It's mainly, really, despite what Nigel Farage says, it's a Tory defector party. So people fed up with the Tories are going to UKIP as a protest vote. What he's got to try and do is translate that into a meaningful vote at the general election rather than the Europeans, which is obviously going to be a protest election. Yeah. And to do that, he needs to turn it more from being a one-man band into a party with a series of candidates and a series of different faces. Otherwise, it just becomes a protest vote and not much more.
I mean, Deborah, first of all, do you accept that analysis? That, I mean, is that what you've seen?
Yes, I do.
I mean, do people know anyone else in UKIP? They may know a candidate, they may know a local candidate. Yeah. I accept that, but at the leadership level, okay, right, all right.
No, and I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think at face value, it's all looking good for Farage, but the Ashcroft poll published overnight,
this is Lord Ashcroft's
huge poll that Lord Ashcroft has done, shows that he's not that popular. He's actually the third least popular politician of all of the politicians covered in that poll. He only beats Nick Clegg and Ed Balls, which isn't a great place to be.
Just tell me a bit more about that, because one would have thought, you know, the blokey image, exactly. The man down the pub, the guy who likes a cigarette.
Exactly, but when you put him in the frame alongside all the other mainstream politicians and ask people to rate him, actually he doesn't do that well, which is quite interesting. And I think, you know, if you look back to 2009, in 2009, UKIP put on 10 points from the beginning of the year to the elections. I don't think they're going to do that this time. I really don't. And actually, if you look at the polling, consistently, Labour is beating UKIP on propensity to vote in the European elections by around 7-8%. So, you know, I wonder if he's sort of peaked.
Well, Isabel, do you think he could be washed up after May? I mean, you know, they could, of course, they could easily win it in the overall share of the vote.
Well, this is one of the key things the Conservatives have to do, is to manage expectations by really bigging up UKIP and saying they've got to get this share of the vote, and actually pushing it so far that whatever UKIP does get will look like a disappointment. That's got to be their strategy, and they should hope that Nigel Farage has peaked early to help them on that.
I think that's absolutely right, because the danger is for the Conservatives that even if he doesn't win it, and I think he may not win it, I think Labour may well win it, he could still do well enough to give the Conservatives a real nightmare.
And it's a headache all for the Conservatives.
What was also, Deborah, I thought interesting about the Ashcroft poll was what it was saying was that he was actually imploring the Tories to hold their nerve, to not get spooked if Nigel Farage does do, and UKIP do well in the May elections, because what will happen is they probably will do well, and Conservatives in marginal seats will take fright. Yeah. And the danger for Cameron is if he keeps tacking to the right, he just alienates a load of voters, and he needs to hold the centre ground.
And that comes so clearly through the Ashcroft poll, doesn't it? Yeah. The real problems that the Conservatives have, and they've got to keep their eye on the prize, and the prize is 2015, not 2014.
OK, I mean, Isabel, but do you think they will hold their nerve?
Well, it depends largely on how well Cameron has love-bombed his backbenchers over the past few months and how well he continues to do. They need to feel as though they've got enough invested in Cameron not to cause trouble for him after the European elections. If he's done a good job, actually he could keep the party on an even keel, give out some sort of goodies to the Eurosceptics and then move on.
I just want to, as I say, I interviewed him earlier. I just want to play out one of the parts of the interview when I put a quotation to him. Just listen to this and his response. It's all about immigration, of course. I've got a quotation here about the impact of immigration on the existing population. For reasons which they could not comprehend, the indigenous population found themselves made strangers in their own country, their wives unable to obtain hospital beds in childbirth, their children unable to obtain school places, their homes and neighbourhoods changed beyond recognition. I mean, you'd agree with that, would you?
In a lot of England, that's true.
And you know where that's from, don't you?
I don't know.
Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech.
Is it?
So-called Rivers of Blood.
Well, what he was warning about was that if you have a large influx of people into an area that change an area beyond recognition, there is tension. That basic principle is right.
Elizabeth, there you see, I mean, you know, he didn't know it was from Enoch Powell, but he didn't pull away from it. That infamous so-called Rivers of Blood speech. Enoch Powell didn't use that exact phrase. I mean, is that something that will resonate with people? They'll go, yeah, OK, that's fine.
I think with pockets of the voters that are attracted to him, it does resonate, and not in a sort of Enoch Powell way, but actually these voters that they are, you know, they want Britain to close their doors. They're scared of change and they're scared of mass immigration, and they want to kind of freeze the Britain in the 1950s. And what is really interesting about that is the Rivers of Blood speech still plagues the Tories in terms of ethnic voters. Lots of ethnic groups that you would think would be naturally more conservative, they run away from the Tories because they still sort of see this inherent racism in them. And the big challenge for David Cameron is, in the longer run, is to actually try and embrace these voters, and that's exactly why this tough rhetoric on immigration.
You use the word racist there, and this, you know, UKIP are very, very much at pains, and Nigel Farage, Isabel, Hardman, very much at pains. Say they're not a racist party. Of course, they're not a racist party. They say, but there he is saying, well, you know, I agree with a certain section of Enoch Powell's infamous speech.
Well, if you Google UKIP, one of the things that comes up on their search banner is that they're a non-racist party, which is an interesting thing to have to state. But as Beth says, actually, this is something that will resonate with some voters. The challenge for David Cameron is to make a sort of open offer to ethnic minority groups and to actually be honest about the benefits of immigration. He did that in his Sunday Times interview today, to say that actually immigration is good for our country, but we do recognise that we need to respond in terms of pressure on public services, which was something that Nigel Farage agreed with in that speech. Actually, that's not wrong to talk about school places and that sort of thing. And to a certain extent, the immigration debate has moved on in this country, in that we are able to talk a little bit more rationally about how to welcome people by making sure that there is space for them and that there are public services that they can use, rather than a sort of unnecessary pressure, I suppose.
And are UKIP and Nigel Farage making the political weather on the issue of immigration? They pulled all the parties, including the Labour Party, more and more onto their territory, haven't they, Deborah?
I think that's right, and I mean, you know, and it's rising again as an issue as people are becoming less concerned about the economy. You can see immigration coming up. But having said that, I think, in a way, for all politicians, it's a bit of a minefield, but particularly for the Tories, who, you know, have not managed to shake off this nasty party image, and that comes clearly through Ashcroft's poll. It comes clearly through a lot of work that we've done at Britain Thinks. They have a very clear image, and it's not as a party that is on the side of ordinary people. And it's a problem, and that, you know, that nasty, you know, the kind of racism, all of that plays to the nasty party image. It's something they have to address.
But this is, I mean, you know, and this, Elizabeth, you know, to push it on beyond those Euro elections, it's not something they can carry forward, because that won't go away. The feeling amongst the public about the problems caused by immigration for this country. So UKIP have pulled the major parties onto this territory, but at the leadership of those major parties, they are all still pro-EU. And UKIP just say, well, the only answer to this immigration, this migration from within the European Union, is to leave it. They have that trump card.
They do, and actually David Cameron was sort of squirming around today as he was asked about how, you know, in 2017, if he has his Euro referendum, will he vote no? You know, will he vote to exit Europe if he can't renegotiate the sort of free movement of people and get some caps on migration? And his stock response is always, well, I will be able to achieve that. But actually, you know, he doesn't want to leave the European Union. you know, he might not be able to achieve his net migration targets. Not, the way I interpret how he's going is he's getting himself into a very awkward corner on this whole issue, unless he's been having private chats with Merkel and other European leaders and he's got a trump card up his sleeve.
Yeah, and that's Isabel Hardman. When we see those figures, as we see, you know, they're never going to get it down, or it doesn't look like they're going to get it down to the tens of thousands, does it, at this point? And here we are talking about Romanians and Bulgarians. Doesn't that strengthen beyond May Nigel Farage's hand?
I think so, yes, but I do think that David Cameron does have a good point when he says that the sort of tides of change in Europe are going in his direction. Actually, a lot of his backbenchers have been doing sort of groundwork in European capitals with other parliamentarians in those countries to try and make the case for European reform. So he has got a sort of hopeful message that actually European leaders aren't entirely turning their back on the idea of reform. The question is, though, is how big the reform is, and when it comes to freedom of movement, that's the sort of cornerstone of the EU.
I mean, also, the other thing I think about this is, you know, if the economy really does tick up this year and wages begin to rise, then maybe these issues will politically fall away a little bit, because part of the reason that immigration has become such a important and emotive issue for people is that there's a scarcity of resource.
And that's very interesting. We're nearly out of time. And Deborah, you know, having looked at some of the other UKIP policies, when you get onto their economic policy, you go, my goodness me, I'm not sure you could sell that if people really did examine it. 31% flat rate of tax, for instance. What about that in terms of a tax cut for millionaires?
I mean, I think you're right in that people aren't, at this point, joining up all of those policies. When they look at the UKIP offer, you know, they are seeing this very much as a kind of none of the above vote. And I think that I can't see that changing, actually. So it's really more about how the other parties respond to all of that, I think.